Order! Order in my court! The gavel didn't just bang, it sounded like a gunshot. The entire courtroom froze. Just seconds before, a mistress, dressed in designer silk, had done the unthinkable. She had physically kicked the soon-to-be ex-wife right in front of the bench, laughing as the poor woman fell to the floor. The millionaire husband smirked, thinking his high-priced lawyers had already won. But he didn't know one crucial detail. He didn't know that the man sitting on the high bench, the terrifying judge with the cold grey eyes, was the woman's father. And he had just seen enough. Stick around, because this isn't just a divorce. It's an execution. The clinking of silverware against fine china echoed through the dining hall of the Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion in the hills of Connecticut that cost more than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. But for Elena Sterling, this wasn't a home. It was a prison wrapped in velvet and marble. Elena, wearing a faded grey cardigan that had seen better days, walked out of the kitchen carrying a heavy silver tray. On it was a bottle of 1995 Chateau Margaux and 2 crystal glasses. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the weight, but from the sight of the 2 people sitting at the head of the table. Her husband, Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global, and a man whose net worth hovered around the $500 million mark, was laughing. He leaned back in his chair, his suit jacket off, tie loosened. Next to him, sitting in Eleanor's usual chair, was Jessica Marlowe. Jessica was everything Eleanor wasn't. She was loud, vibrant, and cruel. She wore a red dress that cost $5,000 and diamonds that glittered aggressively under the chandelier. She was Richard's personal assistant, a title that fooled absolutely no one, especially not the tabloids that had been running pictures of them together in Cabo for the last 3 months. Finally, Jessica sighed, rolling her eyes as Eleanor approached. God, Richard, is she always this slow? I could have flown to Paris and back in the time it took to uncork a bottle. Richard didn't even look at his wife. He just held out his glass. Just pour it, Elena, and try not to spill it this time. This rug is Persian. It's worth more than your life. Elena bit her lip, the metallic taste of blood familiar to her now. She poured the wine, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I'm sorry, Richard. The cork was stubborn. Excuses, Jessica sneered. As Eleanor reached across to pour Jessica's glass, the mistress moved her arm, just a fraction of an inch, but it was deliberate. Her elbow knocked Elena's wrist. The red wine splashed, not on the rug, but right onto the sleeve of Jessica's pristine white blazer. The silence that followed was deafening. You clumsy little idiot, Jessica shrieked, jumping up and shoving her chair back. The screech of the wood against the floor was piercing. Look what you did. This is custom Chanel. I didn't, Elena stammered, grabbing a napkin. You moved your arm. Don't you dare blame me, Jessica snapped. She snatched the napkin from Elena's hand and threw it on the floor. Then she turned to Richard, her eyes welling with fake tears. Richard, look at this. She did it on purpose. She's jealous. She's trying to humiliate me in your house. Richard stood up slowly. He was a tall man, imposing, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that held zero warmth. He looked at the stain on Jessica's jacket, then at his wife of 4 years. Elena, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Apologize. Richard, she hit my arm, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, you saw it. I said. Richard stepped closer, towering over her. Apologize to Jessica. Now, or you sleep in the garage. It wasn't the first time he had threatened her. Elena looked at Jessica, who was smirking behind her hand, her fake tears instantly gone. Elena took a deep breath, swallowing her pride. It felt like swallowing broken glass. "I'm sorry, Jessica," Elena murmured. "It was an accident." Jessica laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "An accident. Right. You're just lucky Richard is too kind to throw you out on the street where you belong." Richard sighed, checking his Rolex. "Actually, Jess, that brings me to the surprise." Elena looked up, confused. "Surprise?" Richard reached into his briefcase, which sat on the floor by his chair. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Elena. "What is this?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Freedom," Richard said, taking a sip of his wine. "For me. Those are divorce papers, Elena. I had my legal team draft them up this morning. I'm done. I'm bored of the mousy housewife act. I need someone who fits my image, someone like Jessica." Elena felt the room spin. "Divorce? But, Richard, I've done everything for you. I quit my job. I cut off my friends. I nursed you when you had that surgery last year." "And you were compensated," Richard cut in coldly. "You've lived in luxury. You ate my food. You wore the clothes I bought. But the ride is over." Jessica giggled, sipping her wine. "Read the fine print, sweetie. It's a prenup. A really, really tight one." Elena opened the envelope with shaking fingers. She scanned the document. Clause 4. Complete separation of assets. Clause 12. No alimony. Clause 15. Immediate vacation of the premises. "You're leaving me with nothing?" Elena whispered. "Richard, I have nowhere to go. My mother passed away 2 years ago. I sold my apartment to help fund your startup back when we met. Business is business," Richard shrugged. "You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things. Take whatever fits in 2 suitcases. Anything else stays. It's mine." "Tomorrow?" Elena choked out. "Actually," Jessica chimed in, checking her nails. "Ideally tonight. I have decorators coming in the morning. We're turning your sewing room into a walk-in closet for my shoes." Richard nodded. "She's right. Tonight is better. Get out, Elena." Elena looked at the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her own career for. She saw nothing but a stranger. "Fine," Elena said, her voice suddenly steady. A strange calm washed over her. It was the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'll go." "Good," Richard said, turning his back to her. "And don't take the silver." The rain in Connecticut that night was torrential. It battered the roof of the Sterling estate like rocks being thrown from the sky. Elena dragged 2 suitcases down the grand staircase. They were old suitcases, the ones she had brought with her into the marriage. They contained simple clothes, a few books, and a framed photo of her mother. She had left the jewelry. She had left the designer coats Richard had bought her for photo ops. She reached the foyer. The front door was massive, made of dark oak. Leaving so soon? Elena froze. Jessica was leaning against the doorway of the living room, holding a glass of champagne. Richard was behind her, scrolling on his phone, indifferent. "I'm leaving," Elena said quietly. Jessica walked over, her heels clicking on the marble. She looked at the suitcases. "Let me check." "What?" "I need to check them," Jessica said with a wicked grin. "Make sure you aren't stealing Richard's property." Before Elena could stop her, Jessica kicked the first suitcase over. She unzipped it and dumped the contents onto the floor. Cheap sweaters, underwear, and toiletries spilled out. Jessica kicked through the pile with her expensive heel. "Pathetic," Jessica laughed. "Primark? Target? God, you really were a stain on this house." She reached out and picked up the framed photo of Eleanor's mother. "Put that down," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave. "Don't touch her." "Or what?" Jessica taunted. She held the photo loosely. "Oops." She let it drop. The glass shattered against the marble floor. Elena stared at the broken glass. Something inside her snapped, but she didn't scream. She didn't attack. She simply knelt down, carefully picked up the photo, brushed off the glass shards, and placed it in her bag. She zipped up the suitcase. She stood up and looked Jessica in the eye. "You will regret this," Elena said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. "Get out!" Richard shouted from the living room, not even looking up. "Stop causing a scene, Elena." Elena opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the pouring rain. She didn't have a car. Richard had leased all the vehicles in the company name and had taken her keys an hour ago. She began to walk down the long, winding driveway, the rain soaking her grey cardigan instantly. She walked for 20 minutes until she reached the gatehouse at the edge of the property. The security guard, old Mr. Henderson, looked at her with pity, but didn't open the gate. He had his orders. Elena huddled under the small overhang of the gatehouse. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, battered Nokia phone. It was a burner phone she had kept hidden for 3 years, ever since Richard started tracking her main phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in a decade. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. It sounded tired. "Papa," Elena whispered, her voice breaking for the first time that night. There was a long silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "Ellie? Is that you?" "Papa, Elena sobbed, sliding down the brick wall to sit on the wet ground. "I made a mistake. You were right. You were right about him. About everything. Where are you?" The voice on the other end hardened instantly. The tiredness vanished, replaced by a tone of authority that had terrified criminals for 40 years. "I'm at the gate. He threw me out. He's divorcing me, Papa. He and his mistress. They humiliated me. They left me with nothing." "Did he hurt you?" "He let her break Mama's picture," Elena cried. "They laughed at me." A pause. Then the voice spoke again, colder than the rain falling around her. "Do not move. I am sending the car. It will be there in 10 minutes. "Papa, I don't want to cause trouble," Elena said, wiping her eyes. "I just need a place to sleep." "Trouble?" The man on the other end let out a dark, dry chuckle. "My dear Ellie, they wanted a war. They have no idea they just bombed a superpower. Dry your tears. The Sterling boy wants to play games with the law. Fine. He's about to find out who writes the rules." The line went dead. 3 weeks later, the Superior Court of Connecticut was buzzing. The divorce of Richard Sterling was high-profile news. The paparazzi were swarming the steps, cameras flashing like lightning storms. A sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb. Richard Sterling stepped out, looking like $1 billion in a custom Armani suit. He waved to the press, a confident smile plastered on his face. Jessica was on his arm, wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, complete with a massive fascinator hat. "Mr. Sterling, is it true your wife is contesting the prenup?" a reporter shouted. "My ex-wife is confused and desperate," Richard said smoothly into the microphones. "But we trust the justice system. We just want this over with, so Jessica and I can start our philanthropic work." "Philanthropic work?" Jessica giggled, clinging to his bicep. "We're planning a gala for orphaned kittens." They swept up the stairs, surrounded by a team of 5 high-priced lawyers, the sharks of New York. A few minutes later, a simple yellow taxi pulled up. No cameras flashed. No reporters shouted. Elena stepped out. She was wearing a modest navy blue suit, clean but clearly older. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a single briefcase. She walked alone. No lawyers. No entourage. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The gallery was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and Richard's business associates. Richard and Jessica sat at the plaintiff's table, laughing and whispering. Their legal team spread out files, laptops, and tablets, taking up half the room. Elena sat at the defendant's table, alone. She placed a notepad and a pen on the desk. "Where is her lawyer?" Jessica whispered loudly to Richard. "Did she can't afford one? Oh, this is going to be tragic." "Hey," Richard called out across the aisle. "Elena, if you want, I can spot you $500 for a public defender." "I'd hate for this to be too easy." Elena didn't turn her head. She sat perfectly straight, staring at the empty judge's bench. The bailiff, a burly man with a thick neck, walked to the front. He looked nervous. He glanced at the door behind the bench, then back at the crowd. "All rise," the bailiff shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Superior Court is now in session. The Honourable Justice Vance presiding." Richard froze. He leaned over to his lead lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne. "Vance? Who is Vance? I thought we paid off. I thought we requested Judge Miller." "Miller loves me. We golf together." "Miller called in sick this morning," Marcus Thorne whispered, frowning. "I don't know a Vance. Must be a visiting judge or a substitute." "Is he buyable?" Richard asked under his breath. "Everyone is buyable, Mr. Sterling." Thorne smirked. The door opened. The room went silent as the judge walked in. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, but he moved with the power of a linebacker. He wore the standard black robes, but there was something different about him. He didn't just walk, he marched. He had steel-grey hair cut short, a neatly trimmed white beard, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He climbed the steps to the bench and sat down. He didn't look at the files. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked straight at Richard Sterling. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The judge's eyes were terrifying. They were cold, analytical, and utterly void of emotion. "Be seated," the judge said. His voice was deep, booming without a microphone. "Your Honor," Marcus Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We were expecting Judge Miller. If I may ask—" "Sit down, Counselor," Judge Vance said. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. Thorne blinked, taken aback. "Yes, Your Honor." "I am Judge Arthur Vance," the judge announced, scanning the room. "I have been assigned this case due to a conflict of interest with Judge Miller. I have reviewed the initial filings. This is a divorce petition citing irreconcilable differences and a contest of the prenuptial agreement." He looked at Eleanor. For a split second, the granite expression softened. Just a fraction. "The defendant is representing herself?" Elena stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Vance said. "Mr. Thorne, you may begin your opening statement. And be brief. I do not have patience for theatrics today." Thorne stood up, pacing in front of the jury box. Though there was no jury for this hearing, he played to the press. "Your Honor," Thorne began, using his best radio voice, "we are here to dissolve a marriage that was, quite frankly, a fraud. My client, Mr. Sterling, is a titan of industry. He married Ms. Eleanor Vance." Richard nudged Jessica. He said her maiden name. "Who cares?" Jessica whispered. "Ms. Vance," Thorne continued, "under the pretense that she was a supportive partner. Instead, we will prove she was lazy, ungrateful, and eventually abusive towards Mr. Sterling and his new partner. We are asking for the prenuptial agreement to be enforced strictly. She leaves with what she came with, which, according to our records, is effectively nothing." Thorne smiled at the press. We also ask for a restraining order. Miss Elena has shown unstable behavior. Judge Vance scribbled something on his notepad. He didn't look up. Miss Elena, your statement? Elena stood up. She didn't pace. She gripped the table. Your Honor, Elena said clearly, I only ask for what is fair. I helped build Sterling Global. I designed the logo. I managed the books for the first 2 years unpaid. I am not asking for half. I am asking for recognition of my contribution. Lies! Jessica shouted from the table. Silence! Judge Vance's gavel slammed down. He looked at Jessica. You are not a party to this lawsuit, young woman. You are an observer. If you speak out of turn again, I will have you removed. Is that clear? Jessica huffed, crossing her arms. Whatever. He's just a cranky old man, she whispered to Richard. Proceed, Judge Vance said to Eleanor. That is all, Your Honor. Eleanor sat down. Very well. Judge Vance leaned forward. Mr. Thorne, call your first witness. We call Richard Sterling to the stand. Richard buttoned his jacket, winked at Jessica, and walked to the witness stand. He placed his hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The bailiff asked. I do, Richard said smoothly. Judge Vance stared at him over the rim of his glasses. Mr. Sterling, remember that you are under oath. Perjury in my courtroom is not a fine. It is a prison sentence. Do you understand? I understand, Your Honor, Richard chuckled dismissively. But the truth is on my side. Judge Vance leaned back. We shall see. Proceed. Mr. Sterling. Marcus Thorne paced back and forth, holding a sheaf of papers. Did Miss Elena Vance ever contribute financially to Sterling Global? Richard adjusted his silk tie, leaning into the microphone. Absolutely not. In fact, she was a drain on resources. She spent thousands a month on personal wellness, spas, gurus, that sort of thing. I worked 18-hour days while she was getting massages. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Eleanor sat silently, her face pale, writing furiously on her notepad. And did she design the company logo as she claims? Thorne asked, smirking. That? Richard laughed, a harsh barking sound. No, I paid a design firm in London $50,000 for that logo. Elena can barely draw a stick figure. The idea that she helped build my empire is, frankly, insulting to my intelligence and hard work. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Thorne said. No further questions. Judge Vance looked at Elena. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. Miss Elena, do you wish to cross-examine the witness? Elena stood up. Her legs felt heavy, but she looked at her father, though nobody else knew he was her father, and saw a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It gave her strength. Yes, Your Honor. She walked to the podium. Richard, Elena began, her voice steady. You claim I didn't work on the books. Do you remember the night of December 14th, 2019? Richard frowned. I don't keep a calendar of every irrelevant night. That was the night the IRS audit came through, Elena said loudly, turning to the gallery. You were panic-stricken. You were crying on the kitchen floor because your previous accountant had messed up the payroll taxes, who stayed up for 3 days straight, refiling 3 years of tax returns to save you from prison. I hired a consultant, Richard stammered, looking at his lawyer. What was the consultant's name? Elena pressed. I don't remember. It was years ago. Was the consultant's name Elena Sterling? She asked. And is it true that you promised me 10% of the company stock in exchange for fixing that mess? A promise written on a napkin? Objection! Thorne shouted, jumping up. There is no record of this napkin. Hearsay. I have it right here, Elena said calmly. She pulled a small, coffee-stained cocktail napkin out of a clear plastic bag. She held it up. Signed by Richard Sterling, dated December 17th, 2019. To Elena for saving my life. 10% is yours. The courtroom gasped. Cameras flashed blindingly. Richard turned red. That's a forgery. She faked it. Judge Vance leaned over the bench. Bailiff, bring that evidence to me. The bailiff handed the napkin to the judge. Vance put on a pair of reading glasses. He studied the signature. He looked at Richard. Mr. Sterling, Vance said, his voice dangerously low. This signature matches the one on your affidavit perfectly. Are you stating under oath that this is a forgery? Richard began to sweat. He tugged at his collar. Clearly she traced it. Or I was drunk. It doesn't count if I was drunk, right? That is not how contract law works, Mr. Sterling, Vance said dryly. And you just admitted you might have signed it, contradicting your statement 10 seconds ago that it was a forgery. You are skating on thin ice. It doesn't matter, Richard shouted, losing his cool. She signed the prenup after that. The prenup cancels everything. It says she gets nothing. Nothing. We will get to the prenup, Vance said. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. You are dismissed for now. Richard stormed back to his table. Jessica leaned over, whispering frantically. You idiot, she hissed. Why didn't you tell me about the napkin? I forgot about it. It was 5 years ago, Richard snapped back. Don't worry. Thorne will fix it. We just need to humiliate her. Make her look crazy. Leave that to me, Jessica smiled, her eyes gleaming with malice. Mr. Thorne, call your next witness, Judge Vance commanded. We call Jessica Marlowe to the stand, Thorne announced. Jessica stood up, smoothing her white dress. She walked to the stand like it was a runway, flipping her hair. She sat down and smiled sweetly at the judge. State your name for the record, the bailiff said. Jessica Marlowe, future Mrs. Sterling, she said, winking at Richard. Miss Marlowe, Thorne began, you have spent a lot of time with Mr. Sterling and the defendant. How would you describe Miss Elena's behavior in the last year? Oh, it was terrifying, Jessica lied effortlessly. She put a hand to her chest. She was paranoid, obsessive. She would call Richard 50 times a day. She accused him of having affairs with everyone, the maid, the secretary, me. She was delusional. Once she threw a vase at him because he was 5 minutes late for dinner. Elena stood up. That's a lie. I never threw anything. Order! Judge Vance banged the gavel. Ms. Elena, you will have your turn. Jessica smirked. See? She's aggressive. She's unstable. Honestly, Richard and I were just friends until she pushed him away with her craziness. We only found comfort in each other after the marriage was already dead. Miss Marlowe, Thorne smiled. Did Miss Elena ever threaten you? Yes, Jessica sniffled, wiping a fake tear. The night she left, she told me I would regret this. She looked at me with such hate. I've been afraid to sleep alone in the mansion. I had to hire extra security. Thank you, Miss Marlowe, Thorne said. Judge Vance looked at Jessica. He stared at her for a long time. It was an uncomfortable silence. Miss Elena, Vance said. Cross-examination. Elena looked at Jessica. She knew there was no point in asking questions. Jessica was a pathological liar. Elena simply shook her head. No questions, Your Honor. The truth is obvious. Very well, Vance said. The court will take a 15-minute recess before we review the financial assets. Everyone remain in the building. Judge Vance stood up and exited through the door behind the bench. The bailiff relaxed. The courtroom broke into chatter. This was the moment everything changed. The judge had left the room, but the stenographer was still typing, and the cameras in the back were still rolling. though the audio feed to the TV stations was cut for the break. Elena remained at her table, organizing her papers. She was exhausted. Her hands were shaking. She reached for her water bottle, but it was empty. She stood up to walk to the water cooler near the bailiff's station. To get there, she had to pass the plaintiff's table. As Elena walked by, keeping her head down, Jessica Marlowe stood up. "Look at her," Jessica said loudly, ensuring the reporters in the front row could hear. "Walking around in that cheap suit. You look like a librarian who got fired for stealing staples." Richard laughed, checking his phone. "Babe, don't waste your breath. She's history." Elena stopped. She turned to Jessica. "I may have a cheap suit, Jessica, but at least I bought it with my own money. I didn't have to sleep with a married man to get it." The reporters gasped. Someone in the back shouted, "Ooh!" Jessica's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. The sweet victim act evaporated instantly. She stepped forward, invading Elena's personal space. "You listen to me, you little rat," Jessica hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're clever? You think that old napkin is going to save you? Richard owns this town. We own the lawyers. We probably bought that judge, too. You are going to end up in a gutter." "Get out of my face," Elena said firmly. "Make me," Jessica taunted. Elena tried to step around her. As she moved, Jessica stuck out her right leg, shod in a 6-inch, red-bottomed stiletto heel. It wasn't a trip, it was a kick. Jessica drove the sharp heel into Elena's shin with vicious force. Crack! The sound of the heel hitting the bone was sickeningly loud in the quiet courtroom. Elena cried out in pain, her leg buckling. She fell hard onto the courtroom floor, her briefcase spilling papers everywhere. She clutched her shin, grimacing in agony. "Oops," Jessica laughed, looking down at Elena with pure contempt. "So clumsy. You really should watch where you're going, sweetie." Richard didn't help Elena up. He didn't even look concerned. He laughed. "Nice one, Jess. Maybe that'll knock some sense into her." The bailiff, who had been looking at his phone, jumped up. "Hey, what is going on here?" "She tripped," Jessica shouted, raising her hands innocently. "She tried to attack me and she fell. She's crazy." Elena groaned on the floor, trying to stand, but her leg was throbbing. A bruise was already forming, dark and ugly. "I saw that," a reporter in the front row shouted. "She kicked her!" "Liar!" Jessica screamed back. "You're fake news!" Suddenly, the door behind the bench flew open. It didn't open normally. It slammed against the wall with a force that shook the wood paneling. "Silence!" The voice was like thunder. Judge Vance strode back onto the bench. He wasn't wearing his glasses anymore. His face was a terrifying shade of red, his eyes blazing with a fury that made Richard Sterling's blood turn to ice. He didn't sit down. He stood at the towering podium, looking down at the scene like an avenging god. "Bailiff!" Vance roared. "Lock the doors! Nobody leaves this room! Nobody!" The bailiff scrambled to the double doors and threw the bolt. The click echoed through the silent room. Jessica looked up at the judge, confused. "Excuse me? You can't lock us in here. I need to go to the bathroom. And this woman just tried to assault me." Judge Vance pointed a finger at Jessica. The finger was trembling with rage. "You—" Vance's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow louder than a scream. "I saw everything. I was watching the security feed in my chambers." Jessica's face went pale. It was an accident." "It was battery," Vance shouted. "You just assaulted a litigant in my courtroom, in front of the bench, and then you laughed." Richard stood up, trying to regain control. "Your Honor, let's calm down. Emotions are high. My fiancée is under a lot of stress. I'm sure we can settle this with a fine." "A fine?" Vance looked at Richard as if he were a cockroach. "You think money fixes this? You think your money fixes everything?" "It usually does," Richard muttered under his breath, arrogant to the end. Vance slowly sat down. He picked up his gavel. He didn't bang it. He held it like a weapon. "Bailiff," Vance said, his voice deadly calm. "Take Miss Marlowe into custody immediately. Charge her with contempt of court and assault causing bodily harm." "What?" Jessica shrieked as the bailiff moved towards her, pulling out handcuffs. "Richard, do something! He can't arrest me. I'm wearing Chanel." "Don't touch her," Richard shouted, stepping in front of the bailiff. "Do you know who I am? I will have your badge. I will have this judge disbarred." Vance smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you want to threaten me? Please, continue. I am adding obstruction of justice to the list. Bailiff, if he interferes, arrest him too." The bailiff, a man who had worked for Judge Vance for 20 years and feared him more than God, shoved Richard aside. He grabbed Jessica's wrists. Click, click. The handcuffs were on. "Richard!" Jessica screamed, struggling. "Get them off! This hurts!" "Sit her down in the jury box," Vance ordered. "She is not leaving until I am done with her." The bailiff shoved a weeping, furious Jessica into the jury box. Vance turned his eyes to Eleanor, who was being helped into a chair by a kind stenographer. "Miss Elena," Vance said, his voice softening dramatically. "Are you badly injured? Do you require a paramedic?" I think I'm okay, Your Honor," Elena said, wincing. "Just a bruise. I can continue." "You are a strong woman," Vance said. "Stronger than these two deserve." He turned back to Richard, who was now standing alone at his table, looking flustered but still defiant. "Now," Vance said, opening a new file folder on his desk. "Mr. Sterling, you mentioned earlier that you didn't know who I was. You were expecting Judge Miller." "Yes," Richard snapped, adjusting his suit. "And when I call my lawyers in New York, you're going to regret this grandstanding. You're just a small-town substitute judge." "A substitute," Vance mused. "That is true. I usually preside over the federal appellate court in D.C. I only came back to Connecticut for a special reason." Richard paused. Federal appellate? That was big league. "What reason?" Richard asked suspiciously. Judge Vance reached into his robe. He pulled out a photograph. It was the same photograph that Jessica had smashed on the floor of the mansion. A copy of it. A picture of an older woman holding a baby. "I came back," Vance said, "because my daughter called me. She told me she was in trouble." Richard looked at Elena, then at the judge. He looked at the nameplate. Judge Arthur Vance. He looked at the docket. Sterling versus Vance. The color drained from Richard's face. It happened slowly, then all at once. He turned ghostly white. "Vance," Richard whispered. "Elena. Vance." "That's right," the judge said, leaning forward. "You never asked about her family, did you, Richard? You were too busy talking about yourself. You knew her mother died. But you never asked about her father. You assumed he was dead or a nobody." Vance stood up again. "I am Arthur Vance, and you arrogant, abusive little man, have been tormenting my little girl." The courtroom erupted. The reporters were on their feet. This was the scoop of the century. Jessica from the jury box stopped crying. She stared at Elena with her mouth open. "Your dad?" Elena looked at Richard, tears streaming down her face. Not of sadness, but of relief. "I told you, Richard. I told you that you would regret this." Richard stammered, his hands shaking violently. "Your Honor. Arthur. Sir, I didn't know. If I had known, if you had known, you would have sucked up to me," Vance spat. "You would have treated her like a princess to get to my connections. That is why I stayed away. That is why she used her mother's name professionally, to see if you actually loved her." Vance picked up the prenup agreement, the document Richard had been waving around like a shield. "You want to enforce this prenup?" Vance asked, holding it up. Maybe we can renegotiate," Richard squeaked. "Oh, we will enforce it," Vance said. "I read it very carefully during the recess, especially Clause 14, Section B." Richard looked confused. "Section B? The Infidelity and Abuse Clause," Vance read aloud. "If either party is found to have committed adultery or physical abuse against the other, the prenuptial agreement is voided, and the offending party forfeits 75% of marital assets." Richard's knees gave out. He grabbed the table to stop from falling. That's not in there. My lawyers wrote it." "Your lawyers are idiots," Vance said. "Or maybe, just maybe, I had a little chat with your senior partner 20 years ago and taught him everything he knows. This is a standard ironclad clause, Richard, and your mistress just kicked my daughter in open court. That is abuse, and you admitted to the affair on the stand." Vance raised the gavel. "The prenup is void. We are now moving to the division of assets." The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Richard Sterling, a man who had graced the cover of Forbes and Fortune, looked like a child whose favorite toy had just been thrown into a wood chipper. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table, his knuckles white. "You can't do this," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "This is a conflict of interest. You're her father. This is a mistrial." Judge Vance leaned back, interlacing his fingers. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, under state law section 400 tusu, a judge is only required to recuse themselves if there is a financial interest or if an objection is raised before the proceedings begin. You didn't raise an objection. You were too busy mocking the defendant. And as for conflict, I am simply enforcing the contract you signed." Vance put his glasses back on. "Now let's do the math. The total value of the marital estate is estimated at 450 million torses. "It's tied up in stocks," Richard shouted. "I can't liquidate it." "You won't have to," Vance said calmly, "because you are transferring the shares. Under the voided prenup, Elena is entitled to 75% of the assets due to the abuse clause. That is $337.5 million, Aswas." Jessica gasped from the jury box, her hand still cuffed. 300. "Richard, do something! That's my shopping money!" "Shut up, Jessica!" Richard screamed, spinning around. "You and your stupid foot just cost me $300 million. "Oh, but we aren't done," Vance interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "We still have the matter of the napkin contract. Exhibit B." He held up the plastic bag containing the stained napkin. "You admitted under oath that you signed it. You admitted Elena saved the company from the IRS. That 10% stake in Sterling Global, that was a separate contract, independent of the marriage. And since the company has grown since 2019, that 10% is now worth. What would you say, Mr. Sterling?" Richard slumped into his chair. 50 million, he croaked. "So," Vance scribbled on a notepad, "that brings Elena's total to roughly $387 million, leaving you with roughly 60 million. Richard let out a breath. Okay, 60 million. I can live with 60 million. I can rebuild. I'm a genius. I'm not finished," Vance boomed. Richard froze. "We have to discuss punitive damages," Vance said, his eyes narrowing, "and criminal fraud." "Fraud?" Richard squeaked. "When you submitted your financial affidavit to this court this morning," Vance said, waving a document, "you listed your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands as business expenses. But upon review during the recess, my clerks are very fast, we found that these accounts were used to purchase personal items, specifically a $2 million diamond necklace for Ms. Marlowe and a $5 million villa in Tuscany." Vance looked at Jessica, Nice villa, by the way. I hope the Italian police enjoy it. You looked at the offshore accounts? Richard asked, terrified. I am a federal judge, you imbecile, Vance growled. I have clearance levels you don't even know exist. I saw the transfers. That is tax fraud. That is perjury. And that is dissipation of marital assets. Vance slammed his hand on the desk. I am seizing the remaining $60 million to cover the fines, back taxes, and punitive damages for emotional distress caused to my daughter. You're taking it all, Richard screamed, tears finally spilling down his face. You're taking everything? Not everything, Vance corrected him. You still have your debt. The mortgage on the Sterling estate is in your name, I believe. And since Elena is taking the house as part of the settlement, she will own the property. You, however, will retain the liability for the outstanding loans you took out against the company last week. I believe it's about $15 million in debt. Richard fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. He literally collapsed onto the dirty courtroom carpet. I'm ruined. I'm bankrupt. And you, Ms. Marlowe. Vance turned his gaze to the jury box. Jessica looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. I didn't know about the fraud. I swear, I just wanted the necklace. He told me he was rich. He lied to me, too. You are just as culpable, Vance said. You accepted stolen funds, and you assaulted a woman in open court. The district attorney is already on his way. You are looking at 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary for the assault, and another 5 for conspiracy to commit fraud. No, Jessica wailed, kicking the wooden railing. I can't go to prison. Orange makes me look sallow. You'll get used to it, Vance said coldly. He turned back to Eleanor. She hadn't said a word. She just watched. She watched the man who had tormented her, who had called her useless, who had thrown her out in the rain, crumble into a sobbing mess on the floor. Ms. Elena, Vance said gently. Is this judgment satisfactory? Elena stood up. She picked up her briefcase. She looked at Richard, shivering on the floor. One more thing, Your Honor, Elena said. Name it, Vance replied. The dog, Elena said. Baxter, the golden retriever. Richard locked him in the kennel because he shed on the Persian rugs. I want the dog. Richard looked up, snot running from his nose. Take the damn dog, take it all. Granted, Vance banged the gavel. Judgment for the defendant. Court is adjourned. The scene outside the Connecticut Superior Court was nothing short of a media frenzy. The news had leaked from inside the locked courtroom before the doors even opened. The headline was already trending on every social media platform. Billionaire bankrupted by secret father-in-law judge. Helicopters circled overhead, chopping the air, while news vans blocked the streets for 3 blocks. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse finally groaned open, and the crowd surged forward against the police barricades. First came Jessica Marlowe. If her entrance that morning had been a walk of pride, her exit was a march of shame. She was still wearing the white wedding-style dress, but it was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. Her wrists were bound tightly in steel handcuffs behind her back. 2 grim-faced officers gripped her arms, marching her down the stone steps. "Get off me!" Jessica screamed, thrashing against the officers. She looked wildly at the cameras, desperate to spin the narrative. "I'm a victim. He lied to me. Richard Sterling told me he was divorced. I didn't know anything about the fraud. Do you know how many followers I have? You can't arrest an influencer." "Watch your head, ma'am," the officer said dryly, shoving her into the back of a squad car. "My dress!" she shrieked, as the rough fabric of the car seat snagged her silk. "Richard, you coward! Tell them I'm innocent." The door slammed shut, silencing her screams. The cruiser's lights flashed, red and blue reflecting in the puddles, and it sped away, carrying the wannabe socialite to a very different kind of gated community. Moments later, Richard Sterling emerged. He looked like a ghost of the man who had walked in. His custom Italian jacket was gone, left behind on the courtroom floor. His tie was missing. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a chest heaving with panic. He stumbled down the stairs, blinking against the flashbulbs that popped like strobe lights. "Mr. Sterling, is it true the judge seized your assets? Richard, how does it feel to lose $500 million in an hour? Are you facing prison time for the Cayman accounts?" Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was closed tight with terror. He pushed through the reporters, his eyes scanning the curb for his salvation. "The car," he muttered to himself. "Just get to the car. Get to the airport." He spotted his driver, Thomas, standing by the curb, but the sleek black Maybach was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a massive yellow tow truck was blocking the lane, hoisting the luxury vehicle into the air. "Thomas!" Richard shouted, running toward him. "Stop them! What are you doing? That's my car!" Thomas, a large man who had endured Richard's insults for 5 years, simply crossed his arms. He was holding a cardboard box filled with Richard's sunglasses and phone chargers. "Not anymore, boss," Thomas said, his voice flat. "The repo order came through 10 minutes ago. Judge Vance didn't waste any time. The bank owns it now." "Do something!" Richard grabbed Thomas's arm. "Drive me to the airfield. We'll take the jet." Thomas laughed, shaking Richard off. "The jet? The pilot quit an hour ago. And so do I. You haven't paid me for overtime in 6 months. I'm taking this box as severance." Thomas turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Richard stood frozen on the sidewalk. The rain began to fall again. Cold, biting drops that soaked through his thin shirt instantly. He was stranded. No car, no driver, no money, no phone. The crowd suddenly went quiet. A hush fell over the chaotic street. At the top of the courthouse stairs, Elena appeared. She didn't look like a cast-aside wife anymore. She looked like a queen. She stood tall, her shoulders back, holding her simple briefcase. Beside her stood Judge Arthur Vance. He had removed his judicial robes, revealing a trench coat that made him look like a noir detective. He opened a large black umbrella and held it tenderly over his daughter's head. "Ready, Ellie?" Vance asked quietly. "I'm ready, Papa." She smiled. They walked down the stairs together. The reporters parted like the Red Sea. No one shouted questions at them. The dignity radiating from the pair commanded absolute silence. Richard saw them. He saw the woman he had called mousy and useless. He saw the strength in her face that he had never bothered to notice. Desperation clawed at his chest. He realized with a sickening jolt that she was his only lifeline. "Elena!" Richard cried out, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, breaking the line of the crowd. Judge Vance stepped in front of his daughter instantly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. He didn't say a word. He just stared at Richard with the same look he used to sentence murderers. Richard skidded to a halt, terrified. "Elena, please," Richard begged, talking over Vance's shoulder. Rainwater dripped from his nose, mixing with his tears. "Wait. Just listen to me." Elena placed a hand on her father's arm, gently lowering his guard. "It's okay, Papa. I want to hear this." She stepped forward, stopping just out of reach of Richard's grasping hands. "Richard," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was indifferent, which was worse. "Elena, look," Richard stammered, wiping his face. I know today was bad. I know I messed up. But think about the history. Think about the company. I'm the face of Sterling Global. If I go down, the stock tanks. You lose money too." He forced a smile, trying to summon his old charm. "We were a team, right? You and me. The visionary and the supporter. We can fix this. I can fire Jessica. I'll testify against her. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me here with nothing. We can rebuild." Elena studied his face. She looked at the man who had promised to love her forever, the man who had laughed when his mistress kicked her. "Rebuild?" Elena repeated softly. "Richard, you don't build things. You take them. You took my time, you took my love, and you tried to take my dignity." She reached into her purse. Richard's eyes lit up with pathetic hope. Was she writing a check? Was she giving him a credit card? Elena pulled out her wallet. She removed a single, crumpled $5 bill. "What is this?" Richard whispered, staring at the money. "Earlier today, inside that building, you offered me $500 for a lawyer," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent crowd. "You thought my worth was something you could buy with pocket change." She tossed the bill at him. It fluttered in the wind, hitting his wet chest before landing in a dirty puddle at his feet. "This is for the bus, Richard," Elena said coldly. "Though I hear the fare is only $2.50. Keep the change. You're going to need every penny where you're going." "Elena, no." Richard reached out. "Don't touch me," she said, "and don't contact me. If you do, my father won't be the one sitting on the bench next time. He has friends in federal prison who owe him favors." She turned her back on him. It was the most painful moment of Richard's life. Not the loss of the money, but the realization that he no longer existed to her. "Come on, Papa," Elena said, linking arms with the judge. "Let's go get Baxter. I promised him a steak dinner." "I think Baxter would prefer the filet mignon," Vance chuckled, the warmth returning to his voice as he guided her toward a waiting town car that had just pulled up. "And I have a bottle of 82 Margot in the cellar that needs opening, properly this time." They slid into the warm, leather interior of the car. The door thudded shut with a sound of finality. As the car pulled away, the tires splashed a wave of dirty gutter water onto the sidewalk. It soaked Richard's trousers, drenching his socks. He stood there, shivering uncontrollably, alone in the rain. The flashes of the cameras continued to pop, capturing his ruin in high definition. He looked down at the muddy puddle. The $5 bill was floating there, drifting away toward the sewer grate. Richard Sterling fell to his knees and reached for the wet money. He had lost the game. Not because he played poorly, but because he forgot the most important rule of life. Be careful who you kick on your way up, because they might be the ones holding the rope when you fall. And just like that, the Sterling Empire crumbled to dust. Elena not only got her dignity back, but she walked away with the fortune she helped build. Richard Sterling learned the hard way that arrogance is a loan you eventually have to pay back with interest. And Jessica? Well, let's just say orange really wasn't her color. This story is a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, there is always a higher power. Sometimes it's karma, and sometimes it's a furious father with a gavel. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button right now. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss another story of revenge, drama, and instant karma. What would you have done if you were the judge? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.